Hi y'all, welcome to 2025. I know it's been a while. I've taken about 2 months off, which is well deserved. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not new to the channel, you know I did a lot last year, and so I took a little longer break than usual. I usually get started early January, but we have had very bad cold and snow on the ground for almost 3 weeks now. So typically this time of year, I'll do a lot of designing and I get my drone out and take some overhead photos. Well, haven't been able to do that because of the snow on the ground. Last weekend I went out, I think, and it was still like a foot deep in the back flower beds. So kind of taking it cool and started slowly. I've been doing research on nice LEDs for seed starting. I used to use shop lights, but I'm going to start some things from seed this year, and I'm going to be growing fewer things, but I want them to perform really well so when they get out there. I've stumbled upon, that Samsung LEDs are the best LEDs, and Meanwell drivers, LED drivers are like the best on the market. So I got one really nice LED light and a stand from 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗘𝗢 store to start some seeds on. Most of those are going to be vegetables because my attention this year is going to be putting in a vegetable garden because I was not able to get to that last year. Before we get started on this video, I'm going to be doing some reviewing of the annuals. It's performance evaluation season, and so I thought this would be a fun video to do to show you what I'm replanting this year and what I'm axing, and I'm going to be trying something different. So this video is focused on the annuals that I purchased last year. I'll put pictures up on the screen of those, and to the extent I have some photos of them in the garden, I'll share those as well. First, you may have noticed some rebranding. In December, I started changing the name of my YouTube channel and Instagram to The Southerner's Garden. I dropped Northern because one, it was just a really long name. Every time I'm in a group of other creators and they're listing out people's channels, mine is always the longest. And so I'd become a little self-conscious about it, but also what I share on this channel, some of it's related to Southwest Ohio, but a lot of what we go over are things that are applicable to everyone in any garden scenario. So I wanted to de-niche, so to speak, the channel, and so hopefully that'll help some growth in 2025. But also, this channel's not necessarily about gardening in Ohio, although I do a lot of trialing of plants here, specifically hydrangeas, because hydrangea macrophylla, which an update on that project, I'm interested to see how they perform in spring because we've had below 0 temperatures for an extended period of time. And I think we're going to have some dieback on this first year of some buds and blooms. So it'll be exciting to see which one blooms first, and I'll keep you updated on that. Couple other announcements. I'm going to be working with Heirloom Roses again this year, and so I have a coupon code in the description of this video. It's Southern20 for 20% off your roses. That is not an affiliate link, but if you use it, you can get 20% off your entire purchase of roses from heirloomroses.com. I'm also going to be working with Crescent Garden again this year, so I've got to get some containers with all the annuals I'm going to be getting in that Proven Winners is providing me this year. So a lot of my annuals are going to be provided by Proven Winners. I'm going to still be getting a few locally from Stockslegers and Ferns and that type thing. And then this summer, I'm going to be getting 2 new robot mowers. I loved the robot mower. It did a fabulous job last year and allowed me to spend more time in the garden actually getting stuff done and not having to worry about cutting the grass here on this 5 acres. And so between the 3 of them, I'll be able to cut pretty much the entire property automatically and electronically. So that will be really nice to do. We'll just get started into these annuals. So I have a list here of annuals that I'm going to talk about. It's all of the annuals I purchased last year pretty much. Most of them are Proven Winners varieties. About half of them I'm repeating in 2025, or there's an alternate that I'm like substituting. So we'll first start out with the ones that I'm repeating because those are my favorites, and then at the end we'll go over the ones that I'm just not going to do this year. They either didn't perform for me well, or I found something else that I want to try instead. I'm going to have a lot of containers, but I'm still going to be planting a lot of annuals in the ground, and performance in the ground for annuals this past year was better than I expected them to be. So probably most of my annuals went in the ground, and I've typically reiterated on my channel that sometimes that doesn't work great here in Southwest Ohio because the clay soil. So this property here tends to have better soil than it did at my last house, but if you have heavy clay soil, sometimes it doesn't allow the root development on annuals. So amend your soil, give it a couple years, and then maybe you can like plant annuals in there as that clay breaks down a little bit. But we'll start out with Artist Blue Ageratum. I really love this one. I had it next to the sidewalk. It is tiny, tiny blue, purpley flowers, paired really nicely. Stays pretty compact, got about this big around per plant. I had 10 of them and I just lined a little sidewalk with it. Really loved it, so I'm repeating that. I don't know if I'll put them in the same spot. I likely won't, but they're a nice edge of the border plant. And I'm going to be putting them somewhere in the garden next year, maybe a little different spot than next to the sidewalk though. The next one is Supertunia Bordeaux, which if you've followed me for years, you know I have this one almost every year. I think there was one year I didn't plant it because I was having issues with white fly at the last house, but they weren't getting enough sun and they had kind of some overhead irrigation drip from ferns above them. And so I skipped them one year and did like a complete coleus container, which I really loved, but they do really well in full sun. And this year they performed really well, but I paired them with a sweet potato vine called Solar Power Blackheart that completely overtook the container. So if you're pairing Supertunias with sweet potato vine, which I really love, this was a black Supertunia vine, a black sweet potato vine with the purple Supertunia. Make sure you pick a sweet potato vine that is not too vigorous, because in my case, it completely took over. I had to cut everything back in like July, I think is when I did it, or late July, August, and then it never looked great for the rest of the season. But before the sweet potato vine took over, it was gorgeous. The next one we'll go over is Supertunia Vista Bubblegum, which also stunner. It did incredibly well in the landscape. I'll show you some photos of that. And the containers that I put it in, which was the really big True Drop Crescent Garden containers, it performed really well too. But same issue, towards the end of the season, the Solar Power Green Heart or Lime Heart took over. And so I'm not using Solar Power Lime or Solar Power Black Heart this year. They're a little too vigorous. They would be excellent planted alone. I actually really loved the green as a ground cover in the front bed in front of me here, but they were too vigorous for containers for me. They took a ton of water, even in those True Drop containers towards the end of the summer when it was so hot and we were in a drought. I needed to refill those like every week and a half, 2 weeks, and they were just sucking the moisture out of the soil, and a little more watering care than I cared to give there for those big containers. So I'm going to try something in those containers this year that's still going to be pretty, but not quite as much as a water hog, I think. The next one is Campfire Marshmallow Bidens. Now, I loved this plant. So this was one of the last ones I planted in my annuals. I got it last year. I'd never tried it before. I planted it next to the front bench in the front garden. I'm sure I have some photos of it. I'm sure I talked about it in videos last year because it just exploded. When I planted it, I thought it was dead. I'd given it too much water and it had stayed kind of in the shade for some protection because it got hot really early last year. And when I got them in the ground, they looked rough, like they would not make it. And they exploded. Huge pollinator magnet. Love this one. And so as a preview, I'm getting some more of those varieties and this one as well because they did so well. Love it. Great plant. The next one is Diamond Frost Euphorbia. This is always a great container addition. I put this in containers in the back, which the Supertunia Vista Bubblegum and the Supertunia, the Solar Power Lime Heart sweet potato vine kind of took over, and you couldn't see them anymore, but I also put them in the front up here and they did really well. So Diamond Frost Euphorbia is a really great filler. It's that really like ethereal, sparkly looking white bloom that just complements a lot of other plants nicely. So that's one I'll always have. It does really well for me. But just pair it with other plants that grow in similar conditions and not something that's so vigorous that will overtake it early in the season. The next one is Golden Butterfly Ageratum, which is a daisy, and I loved this one last year, but in July or August, I can't remember which month it was, it just completely died on me. And if you'll remember, I ended up pulling it out. It may have been late August, September, because I replaced it with a perennial. Well, I ordered it again this year, and I'm going to try it somewhere else because it looked incredible for so long, and then it just kind of on me. And I don't know, I don't think it was getting too much water. It was so hot. I'm going to try and place it somewhere else this year and see if it does better. If it doesn't perform this very great for me this year, and it did perform really well, just kind of like stopped for some reason all of a sudden, and it was after we had a prolonged period of rain. And so there may have been like some disease issues. I might have needed to spray it with some type of antibacterial agent or pathogen, like something. I don't know what it was, but I'm going to keep an eye on them this year. And if I start to see decline, I might do some research and figure out what that might be, because it's a really beautiful plant, really, really stunning, and a nice pop of yellow, which I really like yellow in the landscape. Not everyone does, but I enjoy it so much. It's one of the colors that I add a lot of, so yellows and pinks and that coral orangey color. Purple fountain grass. Of course, repeating purple fountain grass. Last year I had it all in the landscape and in containers. I don't know that I'll be putting it in containers next year. I do love it in containers, but it literally, I think I showed a video, if I can find it, of dumping out the Crescent Garden containers at the end of the season between the purple fountain grass and the sweet potato vine, solar power lime heart. The container was entirely roots, which is one reason it was sucking up so much water. So they performed incredibly well in the landscape for me. So I'll probably be dotting them around either the back shrub border as filler. There will likely be places in the front garden bed that they will go as well. They did really, really well. In July, we had a storm come through that had some very heavy straight line winds. It was during the week of Cultivate. I think I come back and shot a video on how the garden did in that straight line wind issue, and some things did not do so well, and so some of them blew over, but I tied them up pretty quickly, and when it dried off it looked perfectly fine. So I do love purple fountain grass. It's a really great statement piece. I wish that there was a perennial version that worked here in Southwest Ohio, Zone 6. I don't know of another grass that looks exactly the same as purple fountain grass, but we'll continue trying it as annual. I know Walters Gardens is doing some incredible grass breeding right now, and they've come out with a lot of interesting varieties over the past few years, so I'm excited and hopeful that they'll find something that kind of looks very similar to a purple fountain grass that we can incorporate for permanent year-to-year texture in the garden. But for now, they're not terribly expensive to add to your garden, and they look so good. So purple fountain grass it is. The next one is Snow Princess Lobularia, or alyssum. Now, I love alyssum. It is a great plant, spreads really nicely on the ground. All of the ones that I planted this year, I planted along the sidewalk. I am repeating them this year, but an issue I had was in the summer when it got so hot and so dry, even though they were on drip irrigation, they started fizzling out, so I pulled them out earlier. So next year I've of course planted some trees up front, and it'll be a while before they cast a lot of shade, but I think I'm going to try and plant the alyssum in an area that gets a little more shade, or somewhere where they'll be closer to the house where the sun will cast shade on them after lunchtime. Really good plants. But you might want to give them a little more protection. Otherwise, when it gets so hot in summer for an extended period of time, they might peter out. Because if you're familiar with just the general like perennial alyssum, it likes colder weather or cooler weather. It can stay, you know, kind of evergreen in some instances in some locations, but this is an annual variety, and so I still think it likes a little bit of the cooler weather. So a little more shade maybe potentially in my case. If you're in a higher zone, so zones 3, 4, you may not need to do that. But here we can get pretty hot summers, and it was exceptionally hot last year. So keeping it a little more milder temperatures and happy would probably go a long way for it to performing best. All right, Truffula Pink Gomphrena. This plant, love it. Used it in containers, used it in the landscape last year. I got 20 of those plants last year. 10 of them I planted on the other side of the bench next to the campfire marshmallow bidens, and then 10 of them I planted up to the front. Rabbits or something obliterated the 10 that were close to the driveway. They did come back, not quite as vigorously. That area of the garden I also realized was holding water for some reason. I'm not sure why. A lot of even the perennials that I planted in that area were having issues. So, but over here next to the bench, it looked stunning. So definitely repeating in the ground. I'll probably do containers and in the ground next year. Not sure. I can't remember how many of these I've ordered. I think I've just got a flat, so maybe 10. But beautiful pink color that you can actually dry and use in arrangements. It's a Gomphrena, so it dries really well. But I've never tried that. Last year I was so busy. This year I'm gonna try and take it a little slower and do some interesting, fun things along the way, like that. The next one is SunPatient Orchid Blush. And so I tried 2 SunPatients the past 2 years, loved them both. But SunPatient Orchid Blush is like a pinkish white SunPatient, and it always blooms and performs the best for me. Even after a frost, the top of it died, and it started producing new buds and blooms and foliage underneath until we got just, you know, freezing temperatures and it killed it off. The other one that I planted, Deep Rose, I really love the color of. I'll put some photos on the screen, but I'm not repeating that plant this year because I found that it took a little too long to get going compared to Supertunia Orchid Blush, which seemed to always look good. So Deep Rose, just until, even though I got larger plants this year than I did last year, it seemed like it just took several more weeks up to a month later to look as good in the garden as Orchid Blush did. And I had Orchid Blush planted in similar locations as Deep Rose. I had it planted over here on the other side of the front garden. So it was in all sorts of locations and it looked great everywhere it was. For me, I'm keeping one SunPatient this year, and that is Orchid Blush. I think it's called Compact Orchid Blush, but I really love it. The flowers are almost shimmery pink white. And it pairs nicely with other perennials or other annuals that I've mentioned in this video. Now we'll get into ones that I'm doing alternates on. I'm not doing necessarily the same one, and that is Dichondra Silver Falls. I have planted Dichondra Silver Falls every year for the past, as long as I've been gardening. But Stockslagers this year is carrying one called, I think it's Silver Surfer or something. So it's looks the same to me, but it was a different name. And so I'm just going to try that version. I would still plant Dichondra Silver Falls if you can find it. Excellent spiller in containers. This year I had an issue where it was spilling a little too well and it kind of got on the ground and spread out along the front landscape here. So I might actually have it come back. We have had much colder weather than I expected this winter. So it may not come back, but it probably drops seeds. It can reseed itself, and so I may be dealing with digging some of that up, or I could dig it up and put it in containers if I wanted to. But something to consider for Dichondra Silver Falls. I've mentioned Solar Power Limeheart and Solar Power Blackheart. Great, really prolific potato vines. I didn't notice any particular issues with them, except bugs, you know, kind of want to eat the leaves here and then. So you may need to treat them if you're into that, or spray them. But they were too vigorous for me to use in containers with other plants. You could pair them with an upright like topiary, but I would not plant them with other plants unless it was something vigorous like the grass. So if you just did like a purple fountain grass and the green Solar Power Limeheart, really great, but in that case I also added Supertunia Vista Bubblegum, and it was hard for it to compete, just way too vigorous of a plant. So they need to pare that down a little bit. Alternatively, I'm getting some Proven Winter sweet potato vines that are not supposed to be quite as vigorous, which is typically what you would want in a sweet potato vine if you're planting it in a container anyway, because it's just a lot of maintenance to keep trimmed up. So in a separate video, I will go over all of the new Proven Winners plants that I'm trying outside of these that I am repeating this year. The next one is Superbena Imperial Blue. I am doing a different Superbena this year. Imperial Blue just didn't bloom for me this year very well. I know if you followed along, I was having some issues with high pH in my soil and also chlorosis from a lack of being able to access the iron. And so after I fertilized and got some iron on the plants, they seem to be doing a little better, but I'm just not going to repeat them if those are plants that tend to have issues with chlorosis, because I've had issues with other shrubs in my garden this year. So it's going to be something I struggle with. And so I'm just not going to repeat Superbena Imperial Blue. I am trying a different Superbena this year, one that I've grown 2 years ago. That was new to the market when I was trialing them. And it's actually come back in a container for the past 2 years. It probably will not make it through this winter. It barely survived last year. But I'm excited to try it again this coming year. Zahara Stratosphere Picotee Pink, or Pink Picotee. This is it's kind of advertised as an annual, but it is a perennial. Oftentimes Zaharas don't look good from year to year as a perennial in some places. So I planted it in the ground, and I'm going to see how it comes back this year. If it doesn't look great, then I'm going to pull it up. I didn't necessarily like order more of it, because Zahara just seems to be like something that looks good from year to year, as I mentioned, instead of perennializing. Sometimes they die in winter. Other times they just don't look so good their second season. So just not something I'm repeating this year. Some other things I'm giving up in 2025 are Begonia Bronze Leaf Pink and Begonia Bronze Leaf White. I planted a bunch of begonia the past 2 years, just trying some different begonias this coming year, nothing specific. I'm going to try some tuberous begonias in some place, in some containers, and also in the landscape. A lot of people are getting into saving those from year to year now, or having like very fancy begonias. I don't know that I'll be one of those people, but I do want to try some different begonias. So I'm just giving them up because I want to try something different. And substituting the space that I would normally put them in. Browallia Endless Flirtation and Endless Illumination. This was a purple and white. I think Flirtation is white, Illumination is purple. I did not love these. These are shady annuals. They did not perform well for me. I did plant them, they were the last thing I planted, because when I bought them, I didn't realize they were so much of a shade perennial or shade annual. And I didn't have a great spot for them except next to the house in this back flower bed that's kind of next to the deck. And they just did not perform very well. They stayed really scraggly all season. Just a lot of stems, not a whole lot of flowers. But I also just don't have a great area for like shade plants yet. I do have a lot of trees, but there are no beds under them. So that might be something I could try again in the future. But I'm not really interested in purchasing annuals for shade. Like, if you're going to plant annuals, my thought is they should go in the sun, in containers, maybe part sun. But I'm not trying to like deck out my shade spaces with annuals. Those are great spaces for coral bells and hostas and other nice perennials or shrubs that enjoy the shade, not so much annuals, in my opinion. The other one I am ending this year is 𝗖𝗢𝗓𝗏 Señorita Rosalita. Now, it performed incredibly until July. And here we got those straight line winds, and several of them broke off. After that time when some of them broke off, they just petered out really quickly. I could have cut them back, and which I saw a lot of people doing, was cutting them back and letting them reflush. I don't like having to do annuals that way so much. If they need a little bit of trimming, that's okay, but kind of like perennials, I try to select perennials that are going to look good all season and don't necessarily need to be cut back, because you just lose like an entire month to weeks in the garden where they look okay. So I'm not planting any of those 𝗖𝗢𝗓𝗏s. Now, they did perform really well, I think, and if they had been protected from the wind, they would have been okay. But here I have no protection around me. There's a field next to me. It's pretty flat behind me. Without any protection from wind, it's possible that they would break again. So I'm just not repeating those again. But I do recommend them if you have kind of a secluded location or somewhere where they can be protected from straight line winds. The next few ones are things I'm also just choosing not to repeat again. Persian Shield. I bought these because I thought online it said they could take some sun. Planted them in the sun right here next to the fountain, and they just did not look well all season. They look very bleached out, and I know after doing more research they prefer a little more shade than that. And like I said, I don't have a great shade location for them, and I'm not interested really in purchasing annuals for shade other than like ferns or something like that. Senecio angel wings, which is a proven winners plant, beautiful plant, but I planted them in the ground. I think I planted some in containers too, but they were overtaken by the potato vine. I just didn't like how they performed. They didn't really bulk up for me. I lost a couple of them that I planted in the ground. Could have been the issues with the high pH soil, whatever it was, they didn't like it. And I just didn't think they looked great all season, so I'm not repeating that one. And then the last one is Zinnia Zahara Yellow. Now I'm not repeating this one, but I did like it this year. It was one of the last things I planted. I kind of ordered them. It's like, oh, I'll use these for cutting, not realizing that they were bedding annuals. So they were short zinnias. They only get about this big, but they were really prolific. But I just ran out of room last year to put these annuals, and I kind of stuck them somewhere where they would probably looked better and performed better if they'd been in the front flower bed. So out of, you know, an abundance of kind of caution of having things that I wouldn't use, I just didn't purchase them again this year. But the Zahara series I really liked. So if you find it locally, I think it would do pretty well for you. They bloomed like constantly, and I never deadheaded them. So very different zinnia than you're used to. That performed really well. Thank y'all for joining along in this video. I'm still gonna take it kind of slow here in the new year, so I don't know that I'll be doing a video every week, but there were enough of y'all that were asking where I was at and hoping I was well, and I'd gotten some emails or Instagram messages asking, you know, when I was gonna start back up. Some of you very determined to see the next video, so I thought I'd get on here and start doing a little something. But as soon as the weather starts warming up a little bit, we're gonna get started out in the garden a little bit. My focus this year is gonna be different than last year. Last year, my focus was on getting things in the ground. I planted over 2,000 plants, 700 or so annuals maybe. Most of those plants being shrubs and perennials. And so this year I'm gonna focus on some hardscaping, making the back area around the pool a little nicer, finishing beds that I started last year. I'm still getting a lot of perennials this year from Walters. I'm getting some shrubs from, of course, Proven Winners and Bailey to finish out some spaces. And so this year is going to be focusing on finessing those areas. I also have a project I'm still thinking about that I'll share at a later time that I'm excited about. But I'm not going to be extending like a significant number of flower beds this year, I don't think. Just because, one, it's only me doing this and I have to keep it manageable. And two, I want to make sure I'm conscious of where I can get water and how easy it is to get water there. I took a really long time getting the irrigation in last year because it got hot so early. I dug all the stuff and got it completely like installed in May, and then it got so hot I wasn't able to actually finish any of the valving, the plumbing, and the electrical until the end of October. But I did that because this spring, everything's going to be able to be run like that. I can just start up with irrigation without having to worry about anything. So I'm excited about not having as many like crazy projects this year. You don't always get into something, but I'll be excited to continue to like produce some of the material that I was able to do at my last garden after some things were already established, and more teaching content than just kind of showing you here's what I planted, although that's fun too. Thank y'all for joining me, and remember, be a light. Take care.